In a small village in southern France, tucked between quiet hills and winding roads, there stood a centuries-old stone convent. The building, with its weathered gray walls and blooming flower beds, was home to about 20 nuns. These women had chosen a life of prayer, service, and peace. Among them was an elderly nun named Sister Lucile. She was one of the oldest members of the convent, and though her hair was silver and her back slightly bent with age, there was a calm grace in the way she moved. Most of the younger sisters didn't know much about Sister Lucile's past. She never spoke about her life before the convent. All they knew was that she had arrived many years ago, already dressed in her habit, quiet and reserved. She had taken her vows with sincerity and rarely spoke, unless spoken to. Her days were filled with the same rhythm as everyone else's: morning prayers, simple meals, garden duties, and time spent in silent meditation. She did her work without complaint, helped the kitchen sisters when needed, and listened patiently whenever someone needed a comforting presence. But something about her always seemed different, like she was carrying a story no one else knew. There was an old upright piano in the convent's common room, slightly dusty but still in working condition. It stood against the wall like a forgotten piece of furniture, and every now and then one of the younger nuns would try to play a simple hymn. The piano was rarely used, mostly because no one really knew how to play it well. Some of the sisters could manage a few notes, maybe a church tune or two, but that was about it. Occasionally, the sound of awkward playing would echo through the halls, followed by laughter or playful teasing. Sister Lucile often sat quietly in the corner of the room during these times, knitting or reading a small prayer book. She never said much when the piano was being played. Sometimes she would pause for a moment, listening, then return to her knitting. The others didn't pay much attention to this. They thought she simply enjoyed the sound of music, even if it was a bit clumsy. One day, a young sister named Marie asked Lucile, "Sister, do you play the piano?" It was a casual question, said with a smile. Lucile looked up from her knitting, smiled gently, and replied, "Not anymore. That was a long time ago." Then she returned to her work. Marie didn't press the matter. She thought maybe Sister Lucile had once learned a little, like many girls of her generation, and had simply stopped. But Sister Marie was curious. She had noticed the way Lucile looked at the piano. Not just casually, but with a kind of longing, almost like she was remembering something deeply important. It was subtle, but it stirred Marie's curiosity. A few days later, when another nun was struggling with a hymn, Lucile softly corrected a wrong note from across the room. She didn't even look up, just said, "It should be a G, not an F." The others laughed and asked, "How do you know that, Sister Lucile?" But she only smiled and said, "It's just how the tune goes." That small moment planted a seed in Marie's mind. She began to watch Sister Lucile more closely. She noticed how Lucile's fingers would sometimes move slightly, as if playing invisible keys on her lap. She noticed how she always sat a little, straighter when music was playing, as if part of her woke up inside. And she remembered that gentle smile whenever someone played the piano, even badly. One evening after supper, when most of the sisters had gone to their rooms, Marie returned to the common room and found Sister Lucile sitting alone. The room was quiet, the air filled with the smell of fresh lavender from the garden. The piano sat silently in the corner, catching the last rays of sunlight from the window. Marie walked over and sat beside Lucile. "Sister," she said softly, "would you play something? Just one song? I would really like to hear you play." Lucile looked at her with kind eyes and said, "It has been many, many years. My hands are not the same. I don't think they remember how." Marie smiled. "Maybe they do. Just try. For me?" Lucile looked at the piano. She hesitated. Then slowly she rose from her chair and walked over to it. Her steps were small and careful. She sat down on the bench, gently placed her hands on the keys, and closed her eyes. She didn't play. Instead, she sat there in silence, her fingers resting on the smooth keys. Marie didn't say anything. She watched, waiting, not wanting to break the moment. After a long pause, Lucille whispered, "The last time I played, it was in a concert hall in Vienna. That was over 50 years ago." Marie's eyes widened. "Vienna? You played there?" Lucille nodded. "A long time ago, before I came here." Then she stood up and quietly walked out of the room, leaving Marie speechless. The next morning, the convent returned to its usual rhythm. Prayers at dawn, chores in the garden, helping the poor, and preparing meals. But something had changed, at least for Sister Marie. She couldn't stop thinking about what Lucille had said. Vienna? A concert hall. What kind of life had Sister Lucille lived before joining the convent? And why had she never spoken of it? Marie began to gently ask some of the older nuns if they knew anything about Lucille's past. Most said no. Some said she had come from a big city, maybe Paris or Lyon. Others remembered hearing something about her being a teacher. But no one had any clear answers. It was as if Sister Lucille's past had been quietly folded away, hidden beneath the daily routines of convent life. A week later, a guest came to the convent, a retired music teacher named Madame Fournier. She had offered to give free music lessons to the younger sisters as a gift to the community. The Mother Superior agreed, and soon the common room echoed with the sounds of scales, chords, and laughter. Sister Lucille stayed away during these lessons, choosing instead to work in the garden or help in the laundry. But one afternoon, as Madame Fournier was teaching, Lucille passed by the room and paused outside the door. Inside, one of the young sisters was struggling with a complex piece. "No, no, the rhythm is wrong," the teacher said. Lucille, without thinking, spoke softly from the hallway. "She's rushing the third measure. It needs to breathe." Everyone turned to look. The teacher stepped into the hallway and asked, "You know this piece?" Lucille looked embarrassed. "I used to play it a long time ago." Madame Fournier looked closely at her. "What's your name?" "Lucille." The teacher blinked, stunned. "Lucille Dufresne?" Lucille froze. Marie, who had followed the scene from a distance, looked between the two women. "You know her?" she asked. Madame Fournier put a hand to her mouth. "I studied your performances when I was in music school. You were one of the finest pianists in all of Europe. They said you disappeared." Lucille looked down. "I did." And with that, the mystery began to unfold. The other sisters were shocked. Could it be true? That their quiet, gentle Lucille had once been a world-renowned pianist? It seemed impossible, but the more they learned, the more pieces began to fit together. Lucille didn't want to talk about her past. She said it belonged to another life. But slowly, gently, Marie and a few others persuaded her to share a little more. She spoke of grand concert halls, of long nights of practice, of the applause that once filled her ears. But she also spoke of loss, of a family tragedy that changed everything. She didn't go into detail, but it was clear that something had broken her heart so deeply that she had chosen a different life, so she walked away from fame and music, and into silence and prayer. In the convent, she found peace. She didn't need applause or recognition. She only needed the quiet rhythm of daily life and the gentle strength of faith. But even in silence, the music inside her had never died. It had simply waited, like a flower sleeping through winter, waiting for spring. And now it seemed that spring had finally come. Sister Lucille still didn't play the piano. Not yet, but the sisters began to see her in a new light, not just as the quiet nun in the corner, but as someone with a deep hidden history, someone who had lived a whole other life before choosing this one. And though they still respected her silence, they hoped that one day she would share her gift with them. Because sometimes the most powerful music comes not from loud performances, but from the quiet hearts that carry it for a lifetime. And so the piano sat quietly, waiting, just like Sister Lucille. The days in the convent passed slowly but peacefully. Sister Lucille, as always, remained quiet and gentle. Most of the younger sisters still didn't fully understand the truth about her past. Even though some now knew that she had once been a great pianist, Lucille never talked about it openly. She continued to help in the kitchen, tend the garden, and spend her time in prayer. But there was something new in the air, an unspoken curiosity. Whispers moved gently through the halls, soft and respectful, like the wind through the old stone walls. Sister Marie had told a few others about what Madame Fournier, the retired music teacher, had said. Word slowly spread. Everyone began looking at Sister Lucille a little differently now. Not with judgment, not with surprise, but with quiet admiration and wonder. How had such a gifted woman ended up in a place like this? And why had she never said a word about it all these years? No one wanted to pressure her, but the truth had stirred something in all of them. Sister Lucille wasn't just a kind elder or a gentle helper. She had once stood under bright lights, played in great halls, and touched the hearts of thousands with her music. The idea felt almost magical to the others. She was still the same person, but now she carried an invisible crown on her head, not of pride, but of greatness that had been buried deep inside her. One afternoon, as the golden light of the sun fell across the convent floor, Sister Marie was dusting the bookshelves. In the library, she found an old stack of music books tucked behind some hymnals. The pages were yellow, the edges worn, but the notes were still clear. One of the books had the name Lucille Dufresne, written in delicate script inside the cover. Marie held it carefully, almost like it was something sacred. She carried it to the common room where the piano sat in silence and placed the book on the stand. Later that evening, when Sister Lucille came in to sit with her knitting, she noticed the book. Right away, she paused. Her eyes settled on the name, her name, and a strange emotion passed over her face, something between sadness and longing. She walked slowly to the piano and closed the book, gently running her hand over the cover. Then she turned away and went back to her chair. Marie watched all of this and said nothing. She was learning to wait. In the following days, the music lessons with Madame Fournier continued. The young nuns were cheerful and eager, but not very skilled. Still, they tried their best. Sister Agnes, who had large hands but little coordination, struggled to keep her fingers on the right keys. Sister Claire, who had a good ear, often got lost halfway through a song. And Sister Marie, though filled with excitement, couldn't play even the simplest scale without making at least 2 mistakes. Lucille sat quietly during most lessons, usually in a chair near the window. She never interrupted, never corrected anyone, but now and then her fingers would twitch slightly when someone hit the wrong note. She'd close her eyes during particularly messy playing, and sometimes hum very softly when a melody began to form. It was clear that something inside her was still deeply connected to the music, even if she tried to hide it. One morning, during a lesson, Sister Agnes struggled to play a short piece. She kept stumbling, frowning at the sheet music. Madame Fournier was patient, but after the 4th attempt, even she seemed unsure how to help. Then, from the back of the room, Lucille spoke softly. "She's starting with the wrong hand." The piece opens with the left. Everyone turned around. Lucille looked a little embarrassed, but continued. And in the second measure, the F sharp is held a little longer. Like this. She walked slowly to the piano, nodded to Agnes, and sat down beside her. With careful fingers, she played the first few bars, slowly and simply, showing her the correct way. It wasn't a performance. It was a lesson. But even in that quiet moment, the music sounded different, smoother, warmer, full of life. The room fell silent. Madame Fournier's eyes shone with emotion. She said, "Sister Lucille, will you help me teach them?" Lucille shook her head gently. "No, I don't teach anymore. I only wanted to help her find the right notes." But from that day on, something changed. She still sat in her corner, still kept mostly to herself, but now and then she would offer a quiet tip, a tiny correction, or a soft hum that led the others to the right melody. The young sisters began to treat her with new respect, not just because she had once been famous, but because they could now feel her love for music, a love that hadn't vanished, only gone quiet. Marie became even more curious. She began to search for more clues about Lucille's past. She wrote a letter to a small music library in Paris, asking if they had any information about a pianist named Lucille Dufresne. A few weeks later, she received a reply. It included old newspaper clippings, concert reviews, and even a black-and-white photograph of a young woman at a grand piano, her eyes closed, lost in the music. It was Lucille. The reviews were glowing. One called her the soul of France's music scene. Another said she had fingers of silk and a heart of gold. One article mentioned a tragedy, a car accident in the early 1970s that claimed the lives of her parents and younger sister. After that, she had disappeared from public life. No one had seen her since. Marie read all of this in silence, her eyes filled with tears. Now she understood. Lucille hadn't just walked away from music. She had walked away from a life that had broken her heart. The music reminded her of everything she had lost. And maybe, for a long time, it had hurt. Too much to even touch a piano again. But now, after all these years, she was beginning to let it return. Marie gently showed the photograph to Lucille one evening. She didn't say anything, just placed it on the table. Lucille stared at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "That was taken 2 weeks before the accident. I was playing in London. I didn't know it would be my last time." Marie sat beside her, holding her hand. "You don't have to go back to the stage," she said. "But if there's still music inside you, maybe it's ready to come out again. Not for the world. Just for yourself." Lucille didn't answer. But the next day, she opened the old music book again. One night after evening prayers, Lucille returned to the common room alone. The others were already in bed. The convent was silent, except for the soft ticking of the clock and the faint sound of crickets outside. She walked to the piano and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys, shaking slightly. Then she began to play, very slowly, very softly. It was a lullaby, a simple tune she had played as a child. She didn't know that Marie had come back to get her prayer book and was standing quietly in the hallway listening. Marie didn't move. She didn't breathe. The sound of the music wrapped around her like a warm blanket. It was gentle, tender, full of love. And in that moment she realized that this wasn't just music. It was healing. The next day Marie said nothing. But she left a note on the piano that read, "Thank you." After that night, Lucille started playing now and then, but always when she thought no one was listening. Sometimes it was only for a few minutes. Sometimes it was just a few bars of a familiar tune. But every time the music seemed to open something inside her, something that had been locked away for too long. The younger sisters began to listen from behind doors and corners. They didn't want to disturb her. They just wanted to feel the warmth of the music she brought. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was soft, honest, full of emotion, like a voice that had finally found the courage to speak again. One day, the Mother Superior called Lucille to her office. She spoke gently but firmly. "Sister, the girls look up to you. They are learning more from your few notes than from hours of practice. I know your past still hurts, but maybe your gift is not finished yet. Maybe it was waiting for this place, for this time." Lucille looked down at her hands. "I don't want to be seen as someone special. I just want to serve." "You are serving," the mother said, "in a way only you can." That evening, for the first time, Lucille agreed to help during a lesson. Not to perform, but to guide. She sat beside Agnes and helped her find the rhythm. She held Claire's hand and helped her relax her fingers. She hummed a tune to Marie and told her to feel the notes, not just play them. The sisters watched her with quiet admiration. She didn't boast, she didn't act proud, but her presence made the room feel full of beauty. Her kindness, her calm, and her love for music touched everyone. Lucille began to play a little more often now, though still quietly. And slowly, her music began to heal not just her own heart, but the hearts of those around her. The sisters, who once struggled, now played with more feeling. The piano, once dusty and silent, now sang almost every day. No one forced Lucille to perform. No one pushed her into the spotlight. They simply made space for her music to live again. And in that space, something wonderful was beginning to grow. Sister Lucille was slowly changing, though she did not realize it at first. The piano, which had once been a painful reminder of her past, was now becoming a quiet companion again. Each time her fingers touched the keys, something inside her softened. At first it was just a few short pieces, played in the silence of the night when everyone was asleep. But slowly, those pieces became longer. The music returned to her hands like an old friend who had been waiting patiently all these years. The younger nuns continued their lessons during the day, still with Madame Fournier, but now Sister Lucille often sat close by, offering gentle advice. She never made anyone feel small. She corrected mistakes with a smile, gave encouragement when someone was discouraged, and always said just enough to help, but never too much. She treated the piano not as a stage, but as a tool to bring peace and joy, not only to herself, but to others. One cold winter evening the convent had visitors, children from the nearby village school who had come to perform Christmas songs. The chapel was full of warmth despite the snow falling outside. The children sang sweetly, their voices rising like bells in the still air. After the performance, tea and biscuits were served in the dining hall. The children ran about laughing, the sisters chatting with their teachers. Then someone noticed the piano in the corner of the room. One small girl, maybe 9 years old, walked up to it and pressed a few keys. The sound echoed gently. She looked around and asked, "Can someone play something?" The sisters laughed politely, but no one moved. Most of them were too shy or still learning. Madame Fournier smiled and said, "Maybe one of the children knows how to play?" The little girl shook her head. "My grandpa used to play before he passed. I liked how it sounded, but no one plays for us now." Then, to everyone's surprise, Sister Lucille stood up. She walked slowly toward the piano. Her white veil brushed her shoulders and her steps were light, like the snow outside. The room fell quiet. The children stopped moving. Even the adults paused. Lucille sat down, placed her fingers gently on the keys, and began to play. It wasn't a grand piece or a famous melody. It was a soft, simple tune, a song that sounded like something from long ago, something that mothers might hum to babies, or that wind might carry over quiet hills. Her fingers moved with ease, but there was emotion in every note. The little girl who had asked for music stood perfectly still, her eyes wide. Other children moved closer. One by one, everyone gathered around the piano. Lucille played without looking at anyone. She was somewhere else, lost in the sound, in the memory, in the peace. When she finished, there was silence. Then, slowly, the room filled with applause. Not loud, but full of feeling. Even Madame Fournier had tears in her eyes. The children clapped the hardest. The little girl who had asked for the music gave Lucille a tight hug and said, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Lucille smiled and said only, "Thank you, dear." After that day, something shifted in the convent. Word spread quickly about what had happened. People in the village began asking about the nun who could play so beautifully. A few even sent letters, asking if she might perform at small church events or community gatherings. The Mother Superior politely refused most of them, knowing Lucille. was not ready for that yet, but one invitation caught her attention. It came from a music foundation that organized a yearly charity concert in the city. They had heard about Sister Lucille from a former student of Madame Fournier. The letter was respectful and sincere. They wanted her to perform, not for fame, not for show, but as a symbol of music's power to heal and inspire. The concert would raise funds for orphan children. They promised a quiet setting. No press, no pressure. The Mother Superior brought the letter to Lucille and said, "You don't have to say yes, but I think they are asking not because you were famous once, but because your music still has something important to say." Lucille held the letter in her hands for a long time. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. She was afraid, not of the piano, but of the world outside, of being seen again, of old memories rising like ghosts. That night, she walked alone in the convent garden. The snow had stopped falling. The moonlight lit the path like a silver ribbon. She sat on a wooden bench and looked at the stars. Then she began to hum. It was the same lullaby she had played weeks before. She didn't know that Sister Marie had followed quietly behind and was listening from a distance. Marie stepped forward and said, "If you play at the concert, maybe someone will feel less lonely. Maybe someone will believe in beauty again. Isn't that what you always wanted your music to do?" Lucille turned slowly. Her face was calm. "I used to think my music belonged to the world," she said. "Then I lost my family, and I thought it belonged only to pain. But now, maybe it belongs to kindness, to healing." She paused and looked at the moon. "I'll do it. Just once. For the children." News of her decision spread through the convent like firelight. The sisters were filled with a mixture of joy and nervousness. No one had seen her perform on a real stage, not even Madame Fournier. Marie helped her find old sheet music. The convent's small music room became her place of quiet practice. No one disturbed her there. Lucille played for hours each day, not to impress, but to reconnect. At first her fingers trembled, but soon they moved with the same grace they once had. The piano sang under her touch, not loudly but with deep feeling. She chose 3 pieces, one classical, one spiritual, and one original composition she had written in her youth. They were not flashy, they were full of soul. On the day of the concert, the convent provided her with a clean habit and polished shoes. Sister Marie traveled with her, along with Madame Fournier and the Mother Superior. The concert hall was not large. It was an old chapel turned into a music venue, with stained glass windows and wooden seats. The audience included children, teachers, and local music lovers. No reporters, no flashing cameras. Before she went on stage, Lucille stood in front of a mirror. She looked at herself for a long time. The woman in the mirror was older, her face lined by time and sorrow, but her eyes were bright. She placed her hand on her chest and whispered, "This is not about the past. This is about now." When her name was announced, the audience clapped politely. They had been told a special guest would play, a nun with a long-lost talent. No one expected much. Then she walked onto the stage. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the room changed. The first piece was soft and reflective. People leaned forward in their seats. The second was a spiritual melody, like a prayer in music. A child in the front row closed his eyes. And then came the last piece, her own. It was tender and powerful, full of sorrow and hope. It spoke without words. When she finished, there was silence for a full 5 seconds. Then the audience rose in a standing ovation, not out of politeness, but out of genuine emotion. Many were crying. Some held their hands to their hearts. Lucille stood, bowed once, and walked off stage. Back in the green room she sat down, breathing slowly. Sister Marie hugged her tightly. "You did it," she whispered, Lucille smiled through tears. "No," she said, "we did it. You all helped me come back." That night, a video of her performance, recorded quietly by a volunteer, was uploaded to a small community page online. It was meant to be shared among local families. But something unexpected happened. The video began to spread. First, it reached the schoolchildren's parents, then their friends, then musicians across the region, then strangers from different countries. People were touched by the story of an elderly nun who had returned to the piano after decades. They weren't amazed by skill alone. They were moved by emotion, by truth, by the power of quiet courage. Within days, the video went viral. People from all over the world began commenting. "She reminded me why I loved music. This healed something in me. Her hands speak what words cannot." Newspapers tried to contact the convent. Big music shows offered interviews. Famous pianists reached out to meet her. But Lucille refused them all. "I didn't play to be seen," she said simply. "I played to give thanks." Back in the convent, life returned to normal. Sister Lucille resumed her daily work, gardening, cooking, praying. But now she also played more often. And not just for herself. She played for the children when they visited, for the sick when they needed comfort, for the sisters when they gathered in silence. Her music, once hidden, now flowed freely. It didn't belong to the world. It didn't belong to fame. It belonged to love. And in that quiet place, surrounded by the simple life of faith and kindness, Sister Lucille found something she had lost long ago. Not her talent, not her fame, but her peace. Sister Lucille's life began to glow again, not like a bright light in a crowded room, but like the soft flame of a candle in a chapel, quiet, steady, peaceful. After her touching performance at the charity concert, she returned to the convent, with a heart full of something she had not felt in many years: gentle joy. It wasn't the joy of applause or recognition. It was the joy of knowing that she had given something meaningful to the world. Her music had reached people not because of her past fame, but because of the emotion in her heart. Even though she had no interest in interviews, cameras, or any form of public attention, the video of her playing continued to travel across the world. People began writing letters to the convent from different countries. Many wrote about how her music had helped them during hard times. One woman from Japan wrote, "I lost my mother last month, and I could not stop crying. Then I heard your music. It gave me peace." A young man from Brazil wrote, "I was about to give up playing the piano because I thought no one cared. But your story reminded me that music is not about fame. It's about feeling." The convent staff was surprised by the flood of letters and messages. Every day the postman brought more envelopes, some written in beautiful handwriting, others in scribbled notes from children. Some included drawings of pianos and hearts. A few even included small gifts, like rosaries, handmade bookmarks, and photos of families listening to her music on old speakers. Sister Marie took it upon herself to organize all the letters. She created a special album with pages for each message, so that Lucille could read them when she had time. Lucille was touched by every word, every gesture. She didn't reply to most of them personally, but she prayed for each sender by name. She began keeping a list of names on a small notebook she carried in her pocket. The sisters noticed that she had changed. She smiled more. She spoke more often at meals. She laughed, even if softly. But most of all, she played. Not as a performer, but as someone who was finally free. Every Sunday evening she played in the chapel for anyone who wished to come. There were no seats arranged, no announcements. People simply came and sat quietly. Sometimes there were 5 listeners. Sometimes there were 30. But no matter who came, Lucille played with the same love. One evening, something unusual happened. A young boy named Thomas, who had been attending the Sunday music evenings with his grandmother, stayed behind after everyone left. He was shy, with brown eyes and messy hair. He walked up to Lucille as she was closing the piano. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Of course, my child," Lucille replied, turning toward him. "Did it hurt? When you stopped playing for a long time?" Lucille looked at him with curiosity. "Yes," she said gently. "It hurt a lot. Why do you ask?" "Because I stopped drawing," the boy said. "I used to draw all the time, but then my dad said it was a waste of time. He wanted me to play sports instead. So I stopped." Lucille felt something stir inside her. She knelt beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Sometimes, when the world doesn't understand our gifts, we hide them. We think it's safer that way. But your gift is still inside you. It's waiting for you." He looked down. "What if I'm not good anymore?" Lucille smiled. "You don't have to be good. You just have to be honest. That's all real art is. Honesty of the heart." Thomas nodded slowly. "Will you come see my drawing one day?" "I would love to," she said. From that day on, Thomas brought a new drawing every Sunday. Sometimes it was messy, sometimes full of color, sometimes strange and beautiful. And Lucille looked at each one like it was a treasure. Her support gave him courage. Just as others had helped her return to her music, she now helped others return to their own hidden light. But not everyone was pleased with Lucille's rising influence. A few older members of the community began whispering. They didn't like how much attention she was getting. They felt the convent should remain quiet and humble, not connected to viral videos or visitors from outside. One even said, "We are not here to make celebrities. We are here to serve God." Lucille heard the whispers, and for a moment, her heart trembled again. She feared she had gone too far, become too visible. But the Mother Superior reassured her. "You have not asked for this attention," she said firmly. "It came to you because the world needed your truth. God gave you a gift, and now He is using it again. For healing, for light." Lucille nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. Another unexpected event happened soon after. The mayor of the nearby town visited the convent and asked if Sister Lucille would be willing to teach a few local children who had no access to music education. They didn't want her to become a full-time teacher, just a kind mentor. Lucille agreed, but on one condition: that the classes would be held at the convent chapel and would remain small and quiet. She did not want a crowd. She wanted to keep the peace she had finally found. Every Wednesday afternoon, 5 children came to the convent, their faces glowing with excitement. They called her Sister Lou. They were between the ages of 8 and 12. Most had never touched a piano before. Some were clumsy, some quick learners, but Lucille never rushed them. She taught them like she played, gently, with patience, with joy. Sometimes, during the lessons, she would tell them stories, not about her past fame, but about how music helped her talk to God when words failed. The children listened wide-eyed, asking questions, laughing when she told them how she once spilled tea on a grand piano during her teenage years. The chapel filled with new sounds, notes of discovery, mistakes followed by giggles, short melodies played with pride. Lucille's world, once silent and small, was now filled with new energy. But it was not overwhelming. It was just right. Then came a letter that would test everything. It was from a famous music institution in Vienna, the very city where she had once performed as a young star. They had seen her video. They wrote respectfully, praising her artistry, her humility, and the emotional depth of her playing. They invited her to give one final performance at their annual winter concert. It would be held in the same hall where she had performed her last major concert before retiring from public life. Lucille froze when she read it. The memories rushed in. That hall held both glory and sorrow. She had once stood there in front of thousands, celebrated, applauded, But it was also the place where she had felt the loneliest, hiding her pain behind perfect notes. She sat in silence for hours. The Mother Superior said, "You do not have to go. You have already given enough. But if your heart wishes to close that chapter properly, then maybe it is time." Lucille prayed for 3 days. And then finally she said yes. But this time, she didn't prepare alone. The children she had been teaching helped her. Thomas drew a picture of her at the piano and gave it to her with the words, "You are never alone." The sisters prayed with her every morning. Marie packed her things and promised to sit in the front row. Madame Fournier, now very old, agreed to travel with them one last time. When Lucille arrived in Vienna, the city looked exactly as she remembered. The buildings were tall and grand. The winter wind had a sharp bite. The concert hall stood proudly, its gold columns shining under the lights. The night of the concert, Lucille stepped on the stage just as she had years ago. But this time, she was not the same woman. She was not performing to prove anything. She was offering a gift. The audience was silent as she began. Her fingers touched the keys, and the music poured out, not like thunder, but like a river. Steady, flowing, true. She played with grace, with sorrow, with love. She closed her eyes and saw her parents, her younger self, the little boy who had asked her about pain, the children at the convent, the sisters who had believed in her. When the last note faded, there was silence. Then applause. But Lucille did not bow. She simply folded her hands, whispered a silent prayer, and left the stage. She had no need for praise. She had returned, not to be celebrated, but to be at peace with the music that had never left her soul. Back in the convent days later, Lucille placed her shoes by the door, her coat on the hook, and walked to the piano. It was evening. The chapel was quiet. She sat down and played. Not for an audience, not for the world, just for the one who had walked with her through every note, every silence, every storm. After Sister Lucille's final concert in Vienna, a deep calm settled over her life. The whirlwind of attention, the letters, the invitations, it all began to fade like a soft mist in the morning sun. Lucille had completed her journey. She had faced the past, shared her music, and found peace within herself. But her story was far from over. Back at the convent, life returned to its quiet rhythm. The gardens bloomed with spring flowers, and the sun shone through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the chapel floor. The sisters went about their daily tasks, but now there was a new warmth in the air, a feeling that something wonderful had touched their lives. Lucille's music became a part of the convent's soul. She no longer played just for herself, but for the entire community. Every evening, after prayers and meals, she sat by the piano in the chapel and played soft melodies that floated through the rooms. Sometimes the other sisters would join her, humming along, or simply listening in silence. It was a time for healing, for gratitude, and for hope. The children who came for lessons continued to visit. Thomas, the boy who had once stopped drawing, grew confident with his pencils and brushes. He would show his drawings to Lucille, who encouraged him gently and proudly. Other children brought their own gifts. One loved to sing, another loved to write poems. Lucille would listen carefully to each child's story, teaching them that art, in any form, was a way to express the heart. News of the convent's small music school spread quietly. More children began coming on Wednesdays, each one eager to learn but also to feel the kindness that Lucille and the sisters shared. The convent, once seen as a place only of prayer and silence, became a place where joy blossomed through music and creativity. Despite her growing influence, Lucille remained humble and reserved. She never sought the spotlight. Instead, she found satisfaction in the small moments, the smile of a child who played their first song, the gentle thank you of an elderly visitor touched by her music, the quiet peace after a long day. One day, a visitor arrived unexpectedly. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a notebook under his arm. He introduced himself as Pierre, a writer and music historian who had heard about Sister Lucille's story from the charity concert. Pierre was fascinated by her journey, from a child prodigy to years of silence, and then to her return through music. He asked if he could spend time with her, to learn more about her life and her thoughts on music. Lucille was hesitant at first but saw no harm in sharing her story with someone who truly cared. Over the following weeks, Pierre visited often. He listened as Lucille spoke softly about her childhood, her dreams, the heartbreak of losing her family, and the comfort she found in the convent. He wrote down her memories carefully, respecting her privacy and dignity. He never pushed her to talk about painful moments, only about the music that had carried her through. Pierre was amazed by her wisdom. She spoke not only of notes and melodies, but of life's deeper meanings, of faith, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. She said, "Music is like a river that flows through time. It can carry sorrow away and bring hope back. It belongs to everyone, but only when it comes from the heart." Pierre decided to write a book about Sister Lucille's life. He wanted to share her story with the world, not just the story of an elderly nun who played piano, but the story of a woman who found courage to face her past, to heal, and to inspire others. The book was published quietly, without much fanfare, but slowly it began to touch hearts. Readers wrote to Pierre thanking him for sharing Lucille's story. Some said it helped them find strength during difficult times. Others said it reminded them that it's never too late to follow your passion. The convent received copies of the book. Sister Lucille read it once, then smiled and set it aside. She never wanted to be famous again. She only wanted her story to be a light for others. As the years passed, Lucille's health began to weaken. The once strong fingers that had danced on the piano keys started to tremble. She still played, but less often. The sisters cared for her tenderly. They knew the music would live on, even if her hands could no longer play. One chilly autumn evening, Lucille sat by the window looking out at the golden leaves falling. She felt peaceful. Her life had been a long journey of love and loss, silence and song. She thought of the children she had taught, the music she had shared, and the kindness she had received. That night, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. She thanked God for the gift of music, for the friends she had made, and for the chance to begin again. In the days that followed, the sisters gathered quietly around her bedside. Lucille smiled faintly and held their hands. She told them not to be sad, that she was ready to rest. Her voice was soft but clear. "I have played my last song," she said. "But the music will never end. It lives in every heart that listens." When Sister Lucille passed away peacefully, the convent felt the loss deeply. But they also felt a great sense of gratitude. She had taught them that even in the darkest times, light could be found. That music, love, and kindness were powerful, beyond measure. The villagers held a simple ceremony to honor her life. Children played gentle songs on the piano she had loved. The convent's chapel echoed with soft melodies, carrying her spirit. Her story continued to inspire many. Schools invited the sisters to tell about her courage. Musicians dedicated performances to her memory, and children like Thomas grew up remembering her lessons, not just about music, but about hope. Years later, a small statue was placed in the convent garden. It showed a nun sitting at a piano, her face calm and joyful. Underneath was a plaque that read, "For Sister Lucille, who taught us that music is the language of the heart, and courage is the key to every door." Her music never stopped playing, not in concert halls or grand stages, but in the lives she touched and the love she shared. Sister Lucille's story is a reminder that it is never too late to follow your passion, to heal your wounds, and to Share your gifts with the world. That sometimes, when the world tries to silence us, our true voice grows stronger in the quiet. And that through kindness, faith, and courage, we can create a song that lasts forever.